Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Secret Origins of Mint Condition. I am your host, James, and Arco, I don't know, Arco's here with us as well. And I didn't surprise us on Arco, but I'm going to say this is like an Arco's X-Files, where we're going to be
Yeah.
diving into some X-Men history again with our excellent X-Men expert. So, Arco,
Well,
welcome.
Stan Lee there, James.
Yeah, welcome to Arco's X-Files, Arco.
Thank you. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you for having me.
And of course, we could not do this podcast with just Arco alone. We have other historians with us. So also joining us, of course, is Joe.
I failed history.
and also joining us is a returning guest. And I will have the other episode out before this one. So returning guest to the show and also an excellent X-Men expert. Arco, it seems like you might have a run for your money with this guest.
Oh, this could be good.
Shareef McIntosh is back with us today as well.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you.
And Arco, since you are the X-Men expert, and Shareef, when we got together for our Godzilla podcast, you expressed an interest in this. And this is a topic that I've been wanting to do for a while. And Joe was there at the time as well. I wanted to talk about X-Men #1, not the original X-Men #1, but X-Men #1 by Jim Lee and Chris Claremont, the book that I think both did wonderful things for the comic industry and also killed it at the same time in one fell swoop.
That's fair.
So we're going to talk about the book in terms of the story and the artwork, but we're also going to talk about its effects on the comic book industry and our thoughts about spectator comic book buying of the 90s and some of that history. So
speculative.
Speculative.
I can't say that word.
So I think we should start with the comic book itself and maybe do a little history of it. So obviously, I'm just going to say, this was like really my first foray in mainstream comic books. I had collected some Incredible Hulk. I was big into Swamp Thing, not a mainstream comic book character. I had collected some Superman, some Batman, but X-Men #1 was my real jumping on point into like a mainstream Marvel character and team. So for me coming into it, it was like, wow. And I obviously, I'm going to say, I didn't really read the story at the time. Jim Lee's art was what sold it for me. That's why I bought it. That's why I flipped through it. But you guys were all X-Men fans. You have a long history with X-Men. So Arco, I'm going to throw it to you. What was your thoughts when you first saw this book, heard about this book, got this book?
Okay, so I did not know this book was coming out. I was in the wild at the time when this happened in 1991, and I just barely got one or two of the issues because I just saw it. I don't know. I must have saw it at a stationery store or something. I had been pretty much out for about a year or so prior to this, and right about issue 250 is when I got out, and now we're talking about the 280, 281 in the Uncanny X-Men is when this came out in the summer of 1991. And I saw the cover that I loved was Magneto cover, which it's amazing the way he's got his hand out. He's got the power rippling around him, and there were no X-Men on that. If anybody doesn't know, they made 5 different covers for this X-Men, all which, you put them together, they make one big splash page, which is amazing. And the Magneto one, got me. And I was reading this storyline, which to me was totally brand new. I love the art, and I didn't know who Jim Lee really was, but I love the story really got me. And the new characters, me and Shareef were talking about, there was so much new happening in this book while also talking about stuff in the past. I love the continuity. It was fantastic. It really got me.
Fantastic. Yeah. So we'll just put a pin in that before I weigh in on anything else. But Shareef, what was your experience? Were you reading up until then, or did you know this book was coming out?
I was very casual into comic books at this time. My friend Aaron is the one who got me and all my friends into comic books around this, maybe a year or two before this. And so when this came out, this was the first time I got the first issue. because everything else, it was like Uncanny was up to like Uncanny X-Men was up to like 357 or something, so I felt like I was kind of playing catch up with comics. And this was the book that, and I went down to mint condition, and I got my cover. And like Arco said, the Magneto cover was the most amazing, and to this day the most coveted cover, and the most expensive one. They're not worth much money, but that's the one. If you're gonna get one, that's the one you want. So and then, over time it just became more and more impactful as I learned that this was, like the original X-Men. It was like kind of homage to the original X-Men, the 1963 cover, the first X-Men. So that even intrigued me even more. And my big thing was art. Like I was really, really, even before this, I was super into artists. Like I was always concerned with who the artist was, if the art wasn't good. Well, I guess we would say trash, Arco. You know our terminologies. So if the art was trash, we weren't really interested in the book. And to me, this was the perfect marriage of art and story. Chris Claremont he's my guy. Like I don't really know any, I didn't really know any other writers at that time. And Chris Claremont was the guy, and he was dynamic, and he was really pushing the envelope of what the original stories were, because I've heard about the old storylines, but nobody, I mean, if you're going to talk about X-Men, you're going to talk about the Chris Claremont run, because he was dynamic, crossovers, Phoenix Force, everything. All the other X titles spawned out of this. So it was super duper impactful to me, and it was what really made me into a comic book fan. It's really my like, definitely, it's like if you never listened to hip hop before, and then the first album you ever bought, that's what X-Men #1 is to me.
That's
Nice. Yeah. Well, Joe, as being the elder statesman of us, the longtime collector and reader of X-Men, what was this like for you?
Expensive, because I bought 5 copies of each cover.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Gross thanked me numerous times. No, I had been reading X-Men basically since Giant Size X-Men #1, which would have been what, Arco May 75?
1975. Yes, it was.
Yeah. I had seen the X-Men appear as guests in other books, specifically Marvel Team Up and places like that. You'd see them once in a while popping up. But I've been reading X-Men for 16 years, and I knew this book was coming. I loved Claremont's writing. I'd seen Jim Lee's art, and I said, well, this has got to be the perfect marriage of a team to put on a comic book, and it sure as hell was. This at me away. And at that point, 1991, I had been reading comic books for 25 years, since 1966. So I wasn't jaded, but I've seen this before. Well, I didn't see this before. This was something dynamic. I wrote notes, like bullet points, and the first thing I wrote was, this book is like a summer blockbuster film.
It was the whole story. All 3 issues was a story.
It
For
was
sure.
amazing. It was high octane. It was on steroids, whatever the heck you want to use as to describe it. So I was very, very happy with this book, and this reignited my interest and love in the X-Men.
Yeah.
So no, that's great, and I would say, like I said, it was my first introduction to the X-Men. Really, I mean, this was the prelude to the cartoon series, so this was like my first introduction really into X-Men proper. Aside from maybe Wolverine, which I really didn't get into until the cartoon series, more so as a character. But so starting with that, if we just look at the book as a whole, and what I'm kind of getting from the three of you, and I'm going to agree, do we think this was a great jumping on point for a new reader?
Absolutely, in my opinion, if you don't mind me going first on this
No,
one,
go ahead.
because if you are not an aficionado of the book and you are young, James, like I'm sure you were when you got in it, you didn't know who maybe Claremont was or his prior work. Even though this was actually his swan song, where everybody in comics knew that he was going to do the first 3 issues and then leave, okay? You were given a fantastic story, a great jumping off point, and you didn't need to know too much backstory for this book to make sense for you, or to at least enjoy, okay? Because there were some footnotes in this one too that I truly enjoyed, and actually went back to get the issues that they were referencing. We spoke about this in the past. So anybody getting into it for the first time, James, I think you picked a perfect series, a perfect book, a perfect starting off point to get in on.
Yeah, does everyone else agree?
Oh, I concur completely. For me, I just said it was like a summer blockbuster, but it's also like a great TV pilot. I mean, when you think of it that way, when I think of great TV pilots, there's one director who comes to mind who directed many TV pilots in the 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s. That's David Nutter. I don't know if you're familiar with his directing, but he was the go-to guy when you had like an hour pilot that you wanted to sell to a network. And this is just like a fantastic TV pilot. This just grabs you from the very beginning. It starts out, and I was trying to think of the Latin term in the middle, medias rex. I don't know.
Imperious Rex.
Well, that's that. Oh, that's Submariner, isn't it?
Sure.
My Latin Latin from grammar school, Catholic grammar school. But no, it grabs you by the throat and just throws you into the action, and that's what's so good about it. So yeah.
And Shareef, would you agree?
Perfect jumping on point.
Yes, I definitely agree. It sold 8 million copies. It's the highest selling comic book to this day.
Yep.
Even when Image went off, you would think Image would have crushed that, and they didn't. And they should have, because the hype was there for Image Comics. And I think, of course, I personally think that this was a great jumping off point, because this was my way in, this was my way deeper in. I had a cursory knowledge of the X-Men because I read a couple of issues of Uncanny, and, I was kind of seeing highlights. But this really was like cemented me as an X-Men fan, let me know who I was going to be in love with for the rest of my life, and all of the characters that I was going to love. And we'll talk about this later, but Wolverine, man. Wolverine, I know you guys had a podcast about Wolverine. Wolverine, to me, what it was that he was dangerous. He was a wild card and possibly could hurt the X-Men, and just because that's his way. Like, he's just like, when he threatens Professor X in this issue, and he puts the claws right up to his face. And and then, of course, Cyclops is like, "Wait, what are you doing? Relax." And so to me, this concept of Wolverine being a wild card and being unhinged and the berserker and all of these things was, this was what made me fall in love with the X-Men,
See that very much, yeah.
Yeah, and it was also like Jim Lee obviously had been working for a while. I think he's probably the golden boy at the time, if I'm not mistaken, or one of the golden boys at the time. And it's like a splash page after splash page. Also, like when he does like the Magneto, was a second page, the full spread where he's like pulling in the astronauts who were coming to his invading asteroid M. That's like a beautiful, again, another beautiful Magneto image.
Oh yeah, I'm looking at it right now on my other computer screen. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
It's gorgeous. Yeah, the scene, all the panels in the danger room when Archangel is holding Colossus and they're all flying and he's doing roll calls. Cyclops, beautiful scene. Every X-Men in there. Like it's. I think, and I also heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but like some of the research I was doing, he was told to draw as many splash pages as he could for this issue because they were going to sell the original art off right afterwards, and that went for it worked. It went for a mint, that artwork.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
So just like to kind of go through the story is we start off in space. There's a renegade space shuttle heading for asteroid M. There's mutants on board who want to take sanctuary in Magneto's asteroid M. Again, this was all new to me. I didn't realize. I realize it now because I've read some of the issues. But that Magneto coming, I guess, previous to this was an ally of the X-Men and led the X-Men for a period of time. So this is like just after that, it seems like, or a little bit after that.
Well, not right. It's no, but it was the first time that he went back to being at least a villain type, but he had been an ally for the X since the mid '80s. In fact, actually took over the school in '85. So now we're talking a good 6 years of issues where he was an ally to them, but now reverse course.
That was one of my questions I had for you, Arco. You just answered. Thank you. Checking it off.
Yeah, because I was
I couldn't think of the year.
I'm still getting my bearings reading this again. I was like, okay, this is where Magneto is. And apparently Magneto at the time when they finally confront him and he blows the spaceship apart and saves the people, he's out of the villain business, it seems like. He's out of the superhero and villain business, and he's like, I just want to be left alone. And then one of the people kills a mutant on his station, and he's like, every time I try to get out, they pull me back in. It seems like
Exactly.
He's Michael Corleone. Yeah.
That's perfect. That was great. Yeah.
And then we kind of cut to, what do we cut to? We cut to the mansion after that where we get the new teams, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
The
New team's blue and the gold. Xavier had just gotten back from the Shi'ar space with his consort Lilandra, and he had been gone all these years, since 1985 when he had a heart attack in issue 200 during the trial of Magneto. He was very weak, and Lilandra beamed him up into space to save his life, and he never came back. All those years, and never came back. So you're talking about Marvel Mutant Massacre. You had Fall of the Mutants, Inferno. We've talked about this. All of those storylines up until 1991, he was not around. All of his students are now grown up and have grown up without him, and that's what he was saying. He said, I need to see what we have here with these teams. I gotta measure their abilities and see where to put them, and that's how he came up with the blue and the gold.
And Arco, is this the origin of the blue and the gold teams? Like,
Yes.
is this the
Yeah.
first time that
Yes.
that ever happened?
Because now you had the original team of X-Men who were X-Factor since 1985 are now part of the X-Men again. Scott, Angel, Beast, Marvel Girl, and Iceman come back, but you have all the X-Men that have been there for the last 10 years. All the Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Storm. And so they decided to do the two teams, and this was the beginning of it.
There's also some self-recrimination on his part. I'm reading here. Instead, we seem to be at each other's throats now more than ever. The differences between us have sharpened to a killing edge, with some of the children entrusted to my care buried. I keep wondering had I never left. Right?
That one child that he's actually talking about is Doug Ramsey, also known as Cypher, who died during the fall of the mutants. He was shot because he was useless. I'm sorry, but yeah. So
we don't tell you that here, but he still feels like if he had been around, maybe somebody else would.
Yes,
he could have.
Exactly. But don't worry, he didn't stay dead for very long. So
right, he's a man returning, but he has a heavy heart,
Yeah.
and so that kind of unionizes him even more. So yeah, it's good writing on Claremont's part.
Yeah, I mean, was this book done? And I when you listen to stuff on YouTube from whoever source it is, you never know how true it is. But I'll trust you guys.
Okay.
Was this book done in like the old Marvel way? Because someone was saying Jim Lee did the artwork based on Claremont's thing, and then Claremont basically filled in the dialogue afterwards. So do you guys know if that's
the Marvel method you're talking about?
Yeah, the Marvel method.
I wouldn't know that. Yeah, I wouldn't. That's not something that I would know. I would say that the storyline definitely reads like an old time X-Men Chris Claremont story. That's how I would take it. Where over the 3 issues, he gets all of his themes and points across. However, how the process came about, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah,
I don't think it was full script because I don't think they were using full script at this point. And using it for years. Why would they go back to that? But I've got to corner Chris Claremont someday.
I remember that it says writer and then it says plots. And it said that, and I wasn't sure the way it's written. It kind of looks like Jim Lee and Chris Claremont created plots.
Yeah, when usually says that,
I wasn't sure. But
when you get that's usually the Marvel method.
Right.
Okay. Like that. Yeah.
Okay. So then maybe it was.
It's not full script.
Because I do remember that because it was it said plots, and that always made me think that Jim Lee came up with some of the plots.
Yeah.
Especially this is the first time we see Professor X's hover chair.
Right.
Oh, is it really?
Yes,
yeah.
Which
and hover chair is the way
he got it from space, if I'm not mistaken. He got it as Shi'ar technology, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, and that's
Did he house that, or was it given to him?
Well, you
Then,
know, with him, it's hard to tell. You know, he can control your mind. So
Exactly.
yeah, I wonder, like, if it's done the old Marvel method, it's Chris Claremont had, like, this is a lot of words on the page, which I was very impressed with.
Yes.
But I'm sure Chris Claremont was also told, like, you got to put words to this book, but you cannot cover up Jim Lee's art. Like, I'm sure
It'd be a crime. That would be
definitely,
a criminal offense.
yeah,
So, because
yeah.
every page, I'm just flipping through the digital copy myself. Every page here is like, of the time. I remember, like, all of these images were on merchandise of the time. Like, these images were everywhere.
I mean, you got to think there was a time in comic books where the cover was amazing, and they hired a different artist to do the cover. And then you open up the book, and it's a different artist who's much less talented and taking much less care on the characters.
The old bait and switch, sir.
Yeah, so for me, you know, especially getting into comics for the first time, if they did that, man, I was like, well, I'm never buying this comic book again.
That goes back to my childhood.
That was terrible.
I would pick up a copy of Detective Comics in the late 60s and beautiful Carmen Infantino cover, and then you open it up and it's like Sheldon Moldoff. that guy had been drawn for 30 years. Oh, come on, man. Why can't Carmen Infantino do the whole book?
Yeah. Well, so kind of just going back, I guess I'm just flipping through the stuff. I'm like, the main page where they introduced the blue and gold team, fantastic. Which I also, it took me for a moment. I mean, I know who they are now. When I was first reading this book, I'm like, who is Forge and Banshee? Like, Forge and Banshee are in there also.
You know, and it's funny you say that, because Forge was always, I mean, he was part of the team, but he's always been more of a backstory kind of guy. And he actually leaves the team altogether in a few issues in. You know, he has a thing with Storm, but Forge is one of those characters where Claremont's love of diversity comes right to the fore here with this character. Vietnam veteran, traumatic PTSD. To this day, he's built. He's half cyborg. Basically, has built parts of his body that he's lost in the war, and is a shaman of sorts. So he's of Indian descent, and I can't tell you exact Cherokee. I can't tell you. I apologize, but definitely a fantastic character. And Banshee's been around since X-Men, like 16 or something like that, back in the 60s. So another great character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's part Steve Austin and Miles O'Brien.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I love Forge. I thought Forge had a crazy unique ability, you know? And I mean, coming up with abilities, man, super hard, you know?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
think of how many abilities we recycle, you know? So to have an ability that's brand new and unique, and we really haven't seen too many people with any ability even in the vein of Forge's ability. So
I agree. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So it's kind of continuing with the story here. I'm just flipping through the artwork again. Now we have the scene with Professor X and Jean Grey. That's the first appearance of that costume for Jean Grey, right?
Yes, it is, once again, and which is fine, because she had the Marvel Girl costume for a while. Then she went into the Green X Factor costume through the 80s, and now she has this one, which is, you know, the classic 90s and the costume, which they also used in the show, James.
Yeah, which I would
wonder
say
what's in those pockets, hip pockets there. I would like to know what's in those pockets.
Decorative pockets.
Very sexy costuming that he created here. Very
But I have to say, this is the best look I like for Jean. I gotta be honest.
I
mean,
I agree. Even though I was older at the time, it's definitely more of the classic look for me.
Right. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel, but these are the looks for the characters. Like,
these are the iconic looks. Yes.
Yeah, so this is the comic book that helped spawn the TV series, right? Now, at the time, I didn't think that the art was based on this, because the art in the TV show doesn't look as much like Jim Lee's clean lines.
No, but
it worked well. But in retrospect, now I've just like I was watching like some clips of the animated series, and I was like, oh, okay, it is actually. It just they didn't, they didn't want to spend the money to make it actually look like Jim Lee,
Right.
So that wasn't the case. But yeah, but this was the popularity of this comic book made Marvel believe they could get the show going, and that's the reason why we had a show, and it was based on these drawings. So
I'm looking at the scene where Rogue is being chased by the Hunter missiles,
Yes.
and it's beautifully rendered. She looks gorgeous. And Arco, correct me if I'm wrong, but is this the beginning of the leather jackets phase? Not only for the X-Men, but for the Avengers, right?
Well, the X Men had them first, and then
Yeah.
a few years later, the
The
Avengers
Avengers got them, yeah.
with specifically the Black Knight would wear them a lot
Yep.
because he had not too much of a costume going on.
Begin with, yes.
Yeah, but the Rogue look was definitely iconic, and she and what's funny, guys, is that the look of the X-Men after 1991, the look and the sound, a year or two later they came out with the show, and if you go back and you look at and you read these words, tell me if you can't hear the voice actors in your head. We all know what Rogue sounded like, and yes, that's exactly who Rogue should sound like, or what she should sound like. Scott Summers sounded just like that. Jean Grey sounded just like. Even Wolverine, finally, they made him sound like like he looks, like you think he should. So
Even Gambit too.
Gambit. Gambit
Right?
to me, that's it. He had that
Yeah.
that. What do you call that? That Louisiana Gat,
Yep.
So I see James. There he is. Okay, yeah, he's got that Louisiana Gat that you read, and now you hear it for the first time. So it worked perfectly. Yes.
Right, I agree, and truthfully, when Gambit, after I heard the animated voice, I was like, I don't know if they're going to be able to put him in a movie, because I don't think anybody's going to be able to do that voice justice. Like there's very few people that like I had kind of fan cast. I don't know if you guys ever watched True Blood, but there was a Cajun dude on that, and he had it down pat.
Oh yeah.
And I was
absolutely.
like, he wouldn't be great like visually, because he wasn't in that greater shape or anything. But I was like, he can do the accent. Let's get him in there.
Yeah.
Because I just knew that they would never do that accent justice.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing. Like I mean, as much as I love Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, when I read this book, I'm hearing Cal Dodd's voice from the animated series for Wolverine. I mean, that's the voice.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm
100%.
saying. Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what Hugh Jackman went to do Wolverine finally, because Wolverine had that gravelly, snarling voice, and I mean that was it, and Professor X as well.
Yes, Professor. Yes,
Yeah.
Professor X. Yeah. I mean, again, love Patrick Stewart, but
Yeah.
I will sometimes hear the professor from the cartoon show.
Definitely.
When I'm reading these books.
This was my X-Men. Everything in the 90s was, as we all know, was my X-Men, and everything I loved about it. Yeah.
I mean, I'll even say, like, for just like the characters that Jim Lee didn't improve their costume. Well, no, Jim Lee improved their costume. Like looking at Colossus and Archangel, that page, like they look beautiful. Like
amazing. And Archangel still looks like he looked. And he looked, but it just the little nuances that he put to it, and the little changes that he did for Archangel and Colossus. James, 100% correct. Absolutely.
Right. Arco, for Archangel, was this the first time we saw the metal wings?
No. The metal wings came about in the Fall of the Mutants in 1987 during the X Factor years, because a year earlier when he during the Marvel Mutant Massacre, he was attacked by the Marauders in the Morlock tunnels, and he was crucified or pinned to the wall, and they beat the crap out of him, and he's got bird bones, which are very brittle, including the wings, and they totally destroyed them. And they made the decision to amputate them, which he fought, but and after that, basically that was his power. So after that, he tried to kill himself, but Apocalypse saved his life and told him that if he became his fourth horseman of death, he would give him his wings back, and that's how he gave him the razor sharp wings, which there's were very, very deadly, and came out as being truly, truly a force to be reckoned with in the X-Men series in the 90s.
Yeah. What was it? What
Yeah.
were his wings made out of?
Are we talking about the metal wings?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not adamant.
Adamantium?
No, they're definitely not
Oh,
adamantium.
okay.
But he was a big fan of like the transmode virus type stuff, like Warlock had. So I'm sure they were, I don't know, sort of like a liquid metal that were malleable, but also very strong and sharp. So something along those lines.
Yeah, I remember reading that he had the ability to like put a different types of poisons on the tips of the like basically the razor feathers and shooting them out at people, and he could put you to sleep or he could kill you.
I have to be honest with you. I don't remember those that particular ability. Not saying that it wasn't, and if it did happen, it happened later on. Because when I remember him as being the Apocalypse's horseman, it was more like they were razor sharp and were able to like be shot out at supersonic speeds, which would be enough to kill you. You don't need to be put to sleep at that point.
We don't need any overkill there. That's enough. Yeah.
So I'm just going to keep progressing through our book. I like that little tangent on Archangel though, because I love
he just looks so good. I mean, compared to what he was, but I mean, he looks great. He looked amazing.
Archangel was, I mean, I hate to say this for the hardcore fans, but he was pretty lame before these wings.
Yes,
I mean, he could just it was just the ability of flight with some goofy wings attached, like no other mutant ability. So
no, that's true.
So the next page that I see up is the Wolverine back in the sewer with Gambit and Psylocke. Again, another beautiful splash page, putting Wolverine back in the that old Hellfire sewer back
the
from
scene. Yeah, absolutely.
John Byrne. Yeah. And then we get to see. So this was, I guess Jim Lee kind of redesigned Psylocke a little bit, or he had done that prior to that, right?
I have to be honest with you. I believe that this was her look. If he did, I'm not sure if he did it in the Muir Island saga, which happened a few issues earlier. But this was the one that I think that they redid, and this was before she became, Quanon, ninja and all that stuff. So yeah.
Okay.
Go with that.
Then we go on. Gambit gets to Jean. He steals a kiss, and then she basically psychically throws him across the room. Again, some more good pages. And then we get to the scene that we were just talking about, where Wolverine almost tries to kill Professor Xavier before Cyclops pulls his arm. And we get the old mangled, ripped to costume, savage-looking Wolverine that we always enjoy.
Love that.
That's all great stuff.
And then the rest of the book is We have Nick Fury. He's telling them about Magneto. He, which was good to see Nick Fury. Like he's using the whole MCU in this, Chris Claremont.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's probably for me. That was probably the first time I saw Nick Fury.
Yeah. Probably for me too, because I was not familiar with the character outside of anything. Like I don't even know when I would see Nick Fury again outside of this book.
And
Mutant gets
Arco. When did Nick Fury turn into Samuel L. Jackson?
Well, it's funny you say that because it did not happen until it happened in a obscure Ultimate X-Men. I think it was an Ultimate Marvel team up in 2002 or 2003. However, in Ultimate X-Men number 5, I believe 6 possibly, you see him in the air floating around, and I'm like, who is this Samuel L. Jackson character? And it turns out to be Nick Fury. And I'm telling you, before you even knew who he was, you looked at it and you said, "This is Nick Fury." This is Samuel L. Jackson. They drew him to look like Samuel L. Jackson. Mark Millar said, "My Nick Fury is Samuel L. Jackson," and that's what he did. And
wow,
and it's fine for me. I did not care that they swapped this character to a different color. I don't care. It worked amazingly. In my Marvel, there are 2 Nick Furies. You have Ultimate Nick Fury, which is what we know of as Samuel L. Jackson, and then you have Nick Fury being the white guy from the 1960s or 1940s actually. So and they both work amazingly.
Long-standing tradition of using real life actors to portray heroes and villains. If you go way back to the original Captain Marvel. I don't know if you guys even know who this actor was. Fred McMurray. My Three Sons. I don't know if you know who that.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
And then when Gil Kane was told to render a new character called Sinestro, he picked David Niven. And if you go back and look at the early
Perfect, and
Sinestro,
that worked
David
perfectly.
Niven.
Yeah, David Niven.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
Wow.
little wiry mustache and all.
Yeah, exactly. Looks like he stepped right out of Casino Royale. Yeah, that's a standing
Wow.
position. Yes.
Yeah, I love that. I was watching a YouTube video about like the origin of all of these characters. Like it was all comic book characters and kind of who was the inspiration. And they showed the dude who was really the inspiration for Wolverine. And bro, he looks exactly like Wolverine. I can't remember his name. He's not like a big name guy, but he had that look, that dangerous, like feral look, and his face looks like the original Wolverine. You know, he had that face that with the cigar and everything. Yeah, so that was pretty cool to see all of the inspirations for all the characters.
And Arco, just to kind of like touch base on our Wolverine episode, this was a Wolverine at his height of all his powers, right?
He is not only powers but popularity. So once again, you see him.
Yes.
You see him in the. I don't care that he was covered in sewer muck. He looked. Wow, chef kiss. Okay, I mean that's what you want to see, and you want to see him and the scene that Shareef eloquently alluded to earlier when they're trying to play tag of sorts where they're trying to get to Professor X, and Professor X wants to see what the abilities of these people are because they're far more able than they were when he left 6 years earlier. So this is basically just a test, and Wolverine popping the claws right in front of him is just to show tag, Charlie, I got you. That's what he said, and that's when Cyclops is like, oh, be careful, and you could have popped your claws and hurt him and all that stuff, and he goes, I'm no rank amateur, bub, so that's so this is the height of Wolverine as we know him and love him, and it continued for the next few years.
Just to kind of like circle back, just to like to go to the end of the issue now, like Magneto's raised a nuclear sub. There's a team of X-Men to go out to stop him. They show up with force, which is probably not the best thing. They all admit they probably should have gone in cooler heads, but Wolverine. But Wolverine goes in there and he cuts Magneto up.
And I love the fact that he raised this nuclear sub that he sank in issue like 152, 153, something like that.
I was going to ask you that question too. That's question number 2.
I apologize that I don't have the exact issue number. I apologize,
close enough,
but it's in the 150s. Killed the Soviets that were on that sub, killed them. Okay, I mean, so I killed them. Although later he would say it was an act of self-defense. Okay,
Arco, what year was that?
I'm sorry. So the 150s. So if Jean Grey died in 1981, the 150s were probably like 82, 83.
I remember that being a big point of contention at New York Comic Con that summer. Did Magneto really kill all those Russians?
Yeah, he did. And he said it was self-defense, but that nuclear sub was always down there, and they went back to it. And that was one of the things that Russia was also on a little bit of a knife's edge over here, because Asteroid M was actually hovering over Russia in space, and now he goes and he gets these Russian nuclear missiles from the submarine. So you'd have that little bit of a Cold War background, which was coming to an end, ironically enough, in 1991. So there was a lot going on there. That you had the social political climate in the comic also, which, when you're 18, you don't care in the slightest, but when you look back, it's a little bit of nuance there that you kind of do appreciate.
Well, that was the hallmark of Chris Claremont. He was writing to multiple audiences on multiple levels and just bringing everybody in, because he was a master wordsmith. And
so I'm sorry, James, Joe, I don't mean to cut you off, but James, are we actually going to be talking a little bit about the story? Because you're going through it in piece by piece, which is fine by me, but there is one part to this story of the 3 issues that we're talking about here that I really do want to speak about. So I'm just hoping we get.
Go ahead. You can go.
No, okay. Well, so this story
The last thing
Okay.
I was going to mention about issue 1, and then we can move on to other stuff, is just that we have at the end the introduction of the acolytes. I guess for the first
Yes,
time. Is
yeah,
that
the
first time?
acolytes.
Yep.
And of course, I know Fabian Cortez as the acolyte that we know the most in this one. Not my favorite acolyte. That will always be Exodus, okay, because he was amazing. But the acolytes were a major power for against the X-Men for the next 3 or 4 years, and this was their first appearance, which is really good. So the whole point of this story was basically retelling Magneto as a villain and bringing the X-Men together to fight their greatest villain, who Magneto always was. And Magneto is at the height of his powers here. Now, remember, the story of Magneto was that he was born in the 20s or 30s because he was in the concentration camps in
Mhm.
Auschwitz. So you had, he was in the 60s. He was a villain in the 60s and even in the 70s. But how could he be around in so many years later and still be in fairly decent shape? Well, something happened to him in Defenders issue number 16, okay, that I promise you that nobody ever saw. And he created his own mutant called Alpha, the ultimate mutant. And this mutant that he created was so powerful, it actually reduced Magneto to the state of infancy, basically a baby in diapers.
I remember
Okay,
that.
and he was that way until issue 104 of X-Men, where you had Chris Claremont writing for him, but you had I'm sorry, who's my least favorite X-Men artist? I apologize.
Oh, Dave Cockrum.
Yeah, Dave Cockrum was there, and and he was brought back to adulthood by the Shi'ar agent Eric the Red. Okay, and
This is
but
all
he
coming back.
but
This
he
is
didn't
amazing.
make him the same age as when he was reduced to infancy. He made him in his prime, and basically a 30-year-old man, but with awesome Jerry curl white hair and and mullet white hair, and he made him extremely powerful. But in that time that he was an infant, he was placed in the care of Moira McTaggart, the leading geneticist of mutation in the world. And we find out that Magneto found out something about himself that Fabian Cortez actually showed him, that there's something in his DNA that was changed that looked a little different. While he was a child, Moira McTaggart actually kind of manipulated with his DNA to try and make him not the villain that he was when he was an adult, because she says she was trying to save her own son Proteus, who was a very powerful mutant, and trying to save his life. That was her logic and her reasoning to do that. And Magneto said, "Oh, I don't know now that I ever would have been the man that I should have been if it wasn't for your tampering. And you took away my free will. You played God." And he was going to kill her and Charles. And Charles had no idea that this was happening. Professor X had no idea. But Maury McTaggart admitted that she did do that, and he was right. And he was basically going to kill her, and for doing that to him. But it turned out in the end that Magneto was going to turn into the person that he was going to become, and nothing that she did what really did that. However, it did show that she did tamper with him, and it kind of set the stage for her own little downfall later on in the series. Okay, so really fast. That was my favorite part of this 3-issue series. That Magneto was actually tampered with as a child, and what came first, the evil or the tampering, or was he always going to be that way? And he was always going to be that way is really what it was. And it showed that Fabian Cortez's power was to amplify a mutant's powers around him. But the more Magneto used his power, the more evil he became. So the more power he used, the more the less basically brains he used, and he became more brute force, and wasn't thinking clearly. And then he realized that Fabian Cortez was doing that, and he went after Fabian Cortez, and yada yada yada. So we know what happened there.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's awesome.
Sorry for the tangent, but that was my
That's why you're. This is why you're here. You're the
This is
expert.
why I got to read the rest of this. I'm reading this trade on Hoopla,
I gotta read.
the Deadly Genesis. I got to read the rest of the trade.
It's so good, so good, and it done in only 3 issues, and preserved continuity. Introduced new characters, okay, brought back old characters, and made it all work seamlessly for this series in 3 issues, which then they also branched out into the Uncanny X-Men series at 281 with the blue and gold team, were introduced in 281, and then a couple of issues later you had the introduction of Bishop, and you had the introduction of Trevor Fitzroy and the Upstarts and all of that, which was fantastic. Blew my mind. Just really, so thinking about it to this day.
3.
Oh my god! I'm just thinking about it this way. No, Bishop is not even part of the continuity.
Not yet. Not for 2 more months. Not for 2 more months after this.
A lot more to come.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's awesome because I love Bishop. Bishop was so
great
he was one of my favorite characters.
Great character. Absolutely.
Yeah, wow. I gotta see if the Hoopla has the rest of these trades, because I know they collected a bunch of the Epic collections from this time too. So I have to go back and read that. I know they have Bishop's Crossing on there, which I've saved. I wanted to read that book. I think that's the first appearance of Bishop in there. So, well, I think we wrapped up the story of the book at least well enough. I mean, audiences, we can look at this on Hoopla. If not, I'm pretty sure you can get at least X-Men 1 pretty cheap
someplace. Just me.
Oh yeah.
Which is going to roll into us talking about, Joe, when you sold the store, how many X-Men #1s did you still have hanging around?
Or still have around?
I had 50 in my personal collection, which I don't have anymore, by the way. I sold all that stuff. But I must have had double that amount, maybe 3 times. The store was filthy with X-Men #1 and X-Force #1. They were all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, that was the other thing. So I guess in the timeline of a comic book like the boom, the first big book was X-Force #1. Which
in a bag, and it had a card. Yes, absolutely. I had it, and
I saw a few of those. Those
too.
I still have. Yes,
absolutely.
I just bought that because other people were buying it. I really wasn't even into X-Force, but everyone was like, "Oh, you should get X-Force 1," and there were so many copies of it. Why not?
Let's just think about that real fast, though. That summer of 1991, okay, you had X-Men #1, X-Force #1, you had X-Men 281, okay. All of that happened just within either the same month or within a few months, and really, not only X-Men #1, which isn't fair that it said that we kind of like. James, you said that it's the best and the worst, really, of what the X-Men were, of what the comics were in the 90s. But let's blame a little bit of X-Force also, because you had
and Spider-Man
1
yeah,
also.
Yeah.
Spider-Man 1 was the year before, in 1990, wasn't it?
1990.
Yeah,
okay.
because X-Men broke the record,
yes,
because
exactly.
I think it was I don't remember how many. That was the Todd McFarlane cover. How many did it sell? Was it 4 million?
Well, I mean,
or 2 million?
Which
variant cover?
Red, gold, silver. I mean.
Black.
Yeah, that's true.
It was crazy. It was nuts. But yeah, those years, Marvel was pumping it out there. And did they do the right thing? Sure, they're a business. They want to make money. And you know what? We bought them. Okay, and
right.
It was
nobody puts a gun to your head to buy all the variants.
Exactly, and that was the beginning of the variants. And kudos to them for literally creating a variant cover for something that we now know as very, very commonplace. Okay, and it all started back there. So while it did suck that you had to spend that much money, nobody, like you said, nobody put a gun to my head to doing it. I did it anyway.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying all that in jest of the time, just because we talk about that era, you talk about that era of comic books, like it was an amazing artistic era, and I think story-wise era too, but people do like look at it like I'm sort of poking fun at it when I say that.
No,
because
I
people look
agree.
at it bad.
I agree. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Spider-Man 1 sold 2.5 million copies.
So
There you go.
2.5, and this went to 8 million copies, 5.5 million more, which is unheard of these days. A physical copy, if they sell 50,000, it
They're
makes like
lucky.
number one. If
Yeah.
you're lucky,
Right.
50,000.
Right. I mean, you have to understand that if this is the peak and this record has never been broken, that tells you a lot. It's like a movie making $1 billion for the first time. Like it doesn't like
Absolutely.
that's a peak of comic book interest in everything. I mean, I think it's telling of what it was, right? We've all said the same thing. It was a perfect marriage of writing and art. And that's what it was. There was times where writing would be awesome, art would be okay. Arco has like 8 artists that he hates. So,
Yeah, we've gone over that before.
I don't hate them. I just don't like their art for
We
what
should
they're,
do
for what
a
they're saying.
podcast just on that. An episode just on that. That'd be great.
So, as we're talking about artists we hate, let's talk about artists we love. Jim Lee.
Yeah.
This is me falling in love with Jim Lee. I think Jim Lee is the best artist in comic book history, and it's because, and I'll say what Tom McFarlane said, no one knows the human anatomy like Jim Lee. That's what Todd McFarlane said. He said, "I can't draw human anatomy like Jim Lee."
And Jim Lee can draw feet.
Yeah.
Right. And he still has a lot of pockets because that was what people were doing at the time. There's a lot of
Not as many
pouches.
pockets not as many pockets as Rob Liefeld was putting people, but
Shatterstar's
Who
pockets.
Oh my goodness.
Or his face
head,
mask.
Yeah, what is that
with
face
pads
mask?
on it? I know,
Right.
ridiculous.
Supposedly he retired last week, Rob Liefeld.
That's what he said. Yeah, that's what I heard.
Yeah.
Oh, I think he's retiring from Deadpool, not from
Yes.
comics.
Okay. Yeah. Deadpool.
That's
That's
it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
But
by the way, X-Force 1 sold 5 million copies.
Wow.
So we went from 2.5 to 5 to 8.8 million copies.
Wow.
So.
Yeah.
I mean, X-Force has some great characters.
Yeah. The first 15 to 20 issues of X-Force were fantastic. They really are. With Cable and the New Mutants, basically becoming X-Force and everything. So it was a natural progression, but going away from the peaceful way of doing things with Xavier's School of Gifted to Cable's way of doing things, where I'm gonna wreck you before to get my way. So
A more proactive way.
you're proactive, yes. Exactly.
Arco,
nice.
I wanted to ask you, Asteroid M.
Yes.
Is this the first? Because Magneto always has an island or an area or something.
It's actually like the second or third iteration of Asteroid M, where the first one had been destroyed. I can't tell you how. It was rebuilt in West Coast Avengers, like 55, 56, when during the Acts of Vengeance, when Scarlet Witch was going crazy after the Vision Quest, when Vision was taken apart and put back together and came back all white. That was the first time that she went insane. And then, so I think this is actually a slightly beefed up version of it, where if you look at Asteroid M, it's got lots of parts to it that he probably just added from junk and everything and created things because he's not only a master of magnetism, but he can also apparently is a genetic genius and can tinker very well with things. So
yes, he's an engineer. He's a civil engineer.
Exactly. So yeah, Asteroid M was and a few years later, Asteroid M would come flaming down also. So yeah. Wait, if it came down at the end of this one, if I'm not mistaken, issue 3, if I'm not mistaken, James. Right?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, if I'm not.
Oh yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, it also came down this way. So yeah.
Wow.
And how many we're like this is I'm just thinking like the timeline of like the stuff that happens to go from like the first 3 issues of this X-Men run. Wasn't it like X-Men? No, it was. When Wolverine's skeleton was taken out in what, X-Men 25?
X-Men 25, yes. So that happened in 1993. So
I was gonna say, wow, this is like a pretty quick timeline of the events that happened between this book
it was so condensed, and so much happened in the next 2 years. You had Executioner Song, which was the next major story X-Men storyline, X-book storyline, happened in 1992, and then uh, I'm sorry, did I say Executioner Song? What did I say? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Fatal Attraction.
Fatal Attractions is what I mean.
said
Okay, so Executioner Song happened with Strife and Cable. That was that storyline in 1992, and then 93 was Fatal Attractions, the one that you're talking about, James.
Wow.
Yeah, fantastic, amazing.
Well, I just like it. I just also like talking about this book and the first 3 issues. This wasn't even an event. It wasn't even like those huge events. It was just like a launching of a new series.
Right.
But it was treated like an event.
It was,
right.
Absolutely. And I had no idea about it because back then, no social media. It's not like I was I wasn't going to mint condition. Knowing about it, at least comic book stores would have had some kind of like advance notice because you're ordering stuff in advance.
And promo material.
Promo material, exactly.
Right.
So I wasn't reading Wizard back then. So I literally had no idea and only fell into it by accident. And, and thank God I did, because I was there for that jumping point, and it was amazing.
Was this a book that brought you back in? I know you came back in.
Yes. No, I came back in. I came back in with this book, and I then went back and got all of the X-Men comics, which is about 20 to 25 that through the next 9 years that I missed from 250 to 281. And although for some reason I had the first appearance of Gambit, I don't know how I got that one, but I got it. And yeah, this one pretty much cemented me back in until about 1996. And and you know how much I loved the next major storyline of Age of Apocalypse, which one day we must do.
We are gonna do. That's probably gonna have to be in parts because it's so big.
That's a big one.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. It got to its height with Age of Apocalypse and its low with After Onslaught.
Absolutely.
So,
Onslaught.
Yeah. So
well, that's also like just crazy, which is a whole other episode of doing Image comic books. But right after this, we had Image comic books created, and then they went through that phase of Image comic books up until the point where I guess Heroes Reborn came back, because then Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, and everyone came back to Marvel to do those.
I know. It is Image. If you ever have the time, there are lots of YouTube videos and actual like documentaries are done on Image, and the guys from Image will tell you what happened is that they got so big that they became what they were running away from Marvel, and it was too much. And Spawn was fantastic, and I loved Supreme. It was awesome too, and Alan Moore actually picked that book up later on in life. But can you tell me anything about Wildcats or Youngblood or anything? Nope. Savage Dragon was okay too, but nothing else. So for whatever Image was, and I'm sorry that we're going into Image here, but I will say this, and I never really talk bad about Image, but I will say this: whatever people think Image was, it was to me a rebellion, and for the creators. However, it was not as successful as we all thought it to be, or they wanted it to be, in my opinion.
Yes, I would completely agree with that.
Well,
now, what I'll say is, because I'm a big Image guy, I will say that Image is still number 3, right?
Okay.
And they're the third option because there was only 2.
Right.
It was you get fired from Marvel and you go to DC, or you get fired from DC and you go to Marvel, and Image offered something else. And I think, to me, Image is still relevant because the Walking Dead series, Invincible, there's still a place to find. Like, I don't think it's hard to curate.
Image, Ghost Machine, Jeff Johns, great stuff.
Yeah. So I think
Spawn is Spawn.
Yeah. But you're right. As far as those original first couple of titles that came out, they all went away.
Yeah.
Remember Wet Work?
Wet
Work, Youngblood. Those were all were nothing.
What was the Sam Keith book?
The
Oh,
Max.
The Max,
The
yes.
Max.
Yeah,
Okay, there you go.
the Max.
See,
The Max, and the Max was great.
Yeah,
The Max was great. I love the Max, but still, the Max is not like it didn't become Spawn is their Superman, right? And it's there, and its legacy, and it's still going strong. It spawned a whole bunch of, no pun intended, a whole bunch of other characters came out of Spawn, that we care about,
But and I loved all of those artists that left Marvel. I loved Jim Lee, Silvestri, McFarlane, Larson. I love them all. I love them all. But it just goes to show you, though, that without maybe some of the direction that they got from Marvel with those characters on their own, they were kind of adrift a little bit, and they took a chance, and they were trailblazers doing what they do. And great. I'm Eric Larson, and I own Savage Dragon. Well, you only sold 10 issues last month, so congratulations. I don't know what to tell you. But
they were like kids in a candy store. They needed a little.
Yeah.
You're right.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Some parental guidance.
Right.
That's what Marvel gave you.
Well,
I mean, it was good that they did it, because it's not like any of those guys, they took a shot and it failed. Like, they're all still working.
That's fine.
Highly sought out artists and creators.
It changed the industry. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with changing the industry. Just don't mess with my continuity.
Right. Well, Arco, I think what you're talking about is very important. So the writing wasn't strong, right? So just because you're an artist doesn't make you a great writer. Like Todd McFarlane is a exception to the rule.
Yeah.
He somehow was able to keep Spawn going and writes it to this day, and it's still good, but Jim Lee wasn't the writer that Todd McFarlane was. Yeah. He didn't have this like forever story that he could do. So I think it was a good idea, but I think maybe some people needed to hire writers. Like everybody can't be,
Yeah, and Joe, I know you got to leave soon, but I know you're a big writer fan too, and an artist. But let's talk about the artists that came after and after Lee and Claremont, left the book. You had Andy Kubert, or one of the Kubert brothers. I apologize.
Andy or Adam, right.
You had Fabian Nicieza, I believe, was also part of the book. Or was he part of the Uncanny book? Can you? I don't know which
might
one.
have been Uncanny. I'm not sure. You're right.
Okay, I mean, it was such in the X-Men world. X-Men 1 was its own revolution all over again. What you had 16 years earlier in 1975, which you thought was lightning in a bottle once, happened again. And what comic book can you say do that? Probably the only one that you could probably say that did that more than once, probably Superman, because it's been around the longest. Maybe Batman also.
Batman. Yeah,
maybe Batman also. That's about it though.
Yeah, Batman had a renaissance in the late 80s, partially due to the film, the Keaton film.
Absolutely.
Because they put great creators on the book at that time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Neil Adams back in the 60s, So
the 60s in the Bronze Age, Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. I think we did it, right? I think we
got to do more. Arco's X-Files, right, James? Arco, no, really. We have Joe's Comic Corner. We now have Keats thinking out of the long box.
Okay.
So why not an Arco's X-Files?
Hey, listen, you know what? If you want to give me this soapbox, trust me, I've got lots of stories when it comes to X-Men that we can talk about.
Tall soapbox, right?
You know what? There's so much there. I'll be doing it for a long time. So there's always something.
Yeah, great. I'm so happy.
Well, listen, we've done more than an hour on just one book, so
think about that.
Good. That'd be great.
Yeah, so audience, I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into X-Men #1. As I said, you can get it on Hoopla, or you can probably get it cheap at any comic book store that you get at, or eBay, or maybe just have one somewhere you didn't even realize it because you bought it and you forgot about it.
That's probably
true.
true.
Get your hands on X-Men #1. So, but I could not have done this episode without my expert panel. So thank you, Joe.
You're quite welcome, James, and thank you, Shareef and Arco, for gracing us with your presence and your knowledge. It's fantastic.
Yes. Thank you, Shareef, for coming back. Hopefully, you will come back again. I think we have more to unpack with you. I think we should do a whole image.
Definitely. Oh, that'd be awesome.
He may be our image guy.
Yeah, I mean, I would, as much as we've just like talked about how unmemorable they are, I would like to read those Image ones and talk
Okay.
about
I mean,
them. And just,
they even though they have a lot of Wildcats actually has an interesting story that they tried to do. It was more ambitious than it was well
Successful.
written.
Then successful.
well, we should do an image
Okay.
episode on some
Cool.
of those
Definitely.
books. And Arco, obviously, thank you for being here with your excellent.
Thank you.
X-Men
You know
knowledge.
I love this and love talking to you guys. Thank you so much.
And listening audience, again, we'd love to hear from you. So if you're listening to this episode and you got your thoughts about X-Men 1, or maybe you got a story about when you bought X-Men 1 or encountered it, we'd love to hear it. So you can put that in the comments page on the Facebook group. We're on Instagram at Secret Origins MC. And if you want to email us, secretorigins@mc@gmail.com. We thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.